Hello and welcome to this Open Doors event at the ICRC's headquarters in Geneva. This is your chance to put your question live to the ICRC's Director General, Yves Daccord. And I'm delighted to say that we've actually had hundreds of questions and comments already. We've had questions from places from all over the world, from India to South Africa, from China to Lebanon. We've really been very impressed by the number and the quality of the questions and the interest that's been shown today. And of course, it's not too late. You can still send in your questions via the Facebook page, or indeed you can tweet us on at Ask Yves. So please do keep your questions coming in. We're going to try to get to as many of those questions as we can. Obviously, we have limited time today, so if you don't hear your question answered, do go back to the Facebook page, and we're going to try to get to as many as we can over the next few days. So about today. Today is in fact the first time that the ICRC has opened the doors of its Geneva offices, headquarters, to the local community here. And it's one of many events that are going on to mark the 150th anniversary of the organisation. And we're really delighted to see so many people who've given up their Sunday to come along here today and learn a bit more about an organisation which really is so much part of their local community. So if you hear music going on outside, that's part of the general activities that are going on around us today. I know you've been out and about today, Yves. It's been a wonderful day. Would you like to tell us a bit about your impressions and what you've been doing today?
What a great impression, because always when you do this kind of open day, you never know exactly what to expect. And it's great to see so many people being there with us, interested, joining us, asking questions. And I think we learn a lot from that type of dynamic. So I'm really very, very, very pleased. And I'm also very pleased to have the chance to finish this open day with you here. Because I think it's great to not only be in connections with the local community, but also with all the people. So I'm very grateful to be here with you right now.
This is really a chance, yes, for you to join in this day with us. Okay, and Yves, perhaps I'm going to start with, a casual question, perhaps not so casual, but can you tell us a little bit more about your role as the Director General? What you do on a daily basis, what your big challenges are?
What I do is very clear. I'm leading, in fact, the executive team of the ICRC. So my job is really to make sure that, in a way, all what we do makes sense together. I have a lot of very, very good people working with me. It makes my life much more easy, and I'm happy about that. But I'm really the one who trying to bring that together. Because, as you know, at the ICRC, we're working in so different places. We have to do also some very operational work, some diplomatic work, some work regarding law, and all that at the same time need to make sense and need to be brought together. So that's my first role. And then, of course, I have a role by making sure that we have the right means to do the job in terms of money, resources, human resources, and being sure that also we bring the right support to our colleagues. We have colleagues in 82 countries in the world, so it makes life extremely interesting and challenging. And right now, my biggest challenge, if you ask me, one is remain right now these days regarding, I would say, the situation in the Middle East, and especially in Syria. I think we are rather nervous as everybody about that, and that's a big challenge right now.
Well, I think that really does bring us to the first question. I mean, we've had a lot of questions about Syria. It's not really surprising. Anybody who's been following the news, I mean, we're all shocked by this humanitarian catastrophe that's unfolding there. So let's get straight to that really tough question. We've had a number of questions, but one here from Petra in the USA, who says, what is the ICRC doing in the light of new developments in Syria, and of course with particular reference to the alleged use of chemical weapons? Can you give us your thoughts?
With pleasure. Thanks for the question, because I think it's a very important question for all of us. Right now, you have to know first what we're trying to do, even today, is to make sure that what we do in Syria makes sense and is relevant. We have right now teams in Damascus, but also in Tartus, in Aleppo, and trying to reach also to other places. So I think we need to make sure that we are able to do what we should be able to do. We can do a lot of work when it's about water and sanitation, for example. There's an enormous need in water in the type of situation like in Syria. A lot of work also related to economic security, and we're trying hard to do work on the medical issues and what we call detention and protection. I must say sometimes it's very frustrating because the needs, and you mentioned that, the needs in Syria are extremely heavy. And I don't have the feeling that the situation for the Syrian population is getting better right now. So what we have done also is to equip our team to be able to deal with any situation, including chemical weapons. We need to be able to do so, and of course to do all the diplomatic work and all the bilateral work also together with our colleagues from the Syrian Red Crescent, with the government, but also with the opposition, and of course around the world, to prepare ourselves for the next phase of this conflict.
And of course, as you said, it must be at times extremely frustrating when you see how much needs to be done.
It is.
How do you deal with that?
It is certainly right now, if you would ask any ICRC colleagues, people will tell you Syria is certainly one of the most frustrating contexts because the needs are enormous. I think we are also very nervous because we don't see any solutions, even political solutions for Syrian right now. And at the same time, we have to take a lot of risk to be able to do what we can do, and we would like to do more. We do a lot already, and it's much better now than a year ago, so we have improved our response, but it's still far from what we would like to do. So I think there is an enormous frustration. We are working hard. We had also, just to give you an example, 22 colleagues of the Syrian Red Crescent which were killed. The last 2 were killed in Homs 3 days ago. So it gives you the impression of what it means right now to be able on the spot to try to bring assistance, protections to people. And of course the latest developments are not very, how can I say that, they're not very encouraging because we don't see any political solutions, and yes, in that case solution should come for the Syrian population and for the region also.
Well, let's look at the chemical weapons issue, because again that's something that concerns so many of us. I mean, what is the ICRC's position on that, and why has the ICRC perhaps been a little quiet on what's happening in Syria over the last days?
3 elements. One, really clearly, is chemical weapons or any weapons of that sort are absolutely strictly forbidden under international law, very clearly. They are convention, they cannot be used, let's be very clear, in any circumstances. There is no exception for that. That's one. And the ICRC, we do our diplomatic bilateral work, including with the Syrian government and different stakeholders, to really repeat that, make sure that there is a clear understanding that it's absolutely strictly forbidden. That's one. B, I think regarding Syria itself and the situation in Syria, we are very careful about any allegations without by ourselves seeing it. It's very careful. And we see also, let's be honest, how much the information sometimes is used or misused, to push 1 or 2 solutions. We have to be very careful, and we really make sure that we have the right information, and then we use it bilaterally to try to influence then the different stakeholders. 3, we are of course prepared to intervene if necessary, and I think we these days are talking a lot about strike, about responsibility. I think we sometimes forget that there is hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are wounded or killed by chemical weapons. They should be our focus, the focus of our response, and make sure that they are treated.
Well, yes, a really tough area for the ICRC and for many people at the moment as they grapple with what's going to happen in the days ahead. But let's move on now to a question, another equally hot topic, if you like. We have a question here from Esmatullah in Afghanistan, and I don't know whether that's he or she. Esmatullah is asking, what's the future of your action in Afghanistan following the attack on your offices?
You should know that Afghanistan is, I think, really a place, a country, and I think Afghan people which are very close to the heart of the ICRC. We have more than 30 years of presence there, continuous presence. I think, Esmatullah, you are referring to the attack we had against an ICRC office in Jalalabad in May, which killed one of our colleagues. As always, when we have the situation like that, we reassess the situation. We always do 2 things. We try to understand why, what's the problem, what is the purpose, what is the message behind an attack like that. But we also try to always assess the relevance of our response. It's very important, especially these days in Afghanistan, which is going through a bit of a transition time, I would say, between the time where international troops are forced to leave and elections and all that makes it very difficult right now. So we have reassessed our response. We have closed 3 offices out of 17, so we've maintained 14 offices in Afghanistan. and we absolutely are ambitious, with all the humility you have to go when it's about security, but we are ambitious to be able to carry out our humanitarian response in Afghanistan, in the entire country. So we are absolutely willing to maintain, and I do think that the ICRC will be even more needed in the coming months and year, and with the support of the Afghan Red Crescent. So yes, a very strong commitment towards Afghanistan.
And of course, we do have such a history in Afghanistan. We've been present there for so long. This must make our commitment even more serious. That we have to stay there.
I would say so, but I think it's also, let's be also very clear, is we have also an history together, so we know very well the country, and I think Afghan people also know very well the ICRC and the Afghan Red Crescent, so that gives it, in a way, a very strong base to be able to continue, even if the situation will be very difficult. It is difficult and will continue to be very difficult in the coming months, I have no doubt on that one, but the commitment is there, and we will absolutely do our best to carry out a very meaningful operation in Afghanistan.
Well, we're moving quickly from Afghanistan to Israel and occupied territories, ILOT. Mesadi is asking, the situation in ILOT has been going on for years. Why are you not denouncing the situation? That's a tough one.
No, it's not a tough one. It's absolutely a legitimate question, I would say, if you look at the ILOT situation. But I must say, honestly, between, I would say, us, the fact is, if you look at ICRC where we operate, most of the places we have been there for decades, and that makes sometimes the situation very complex. I'm looking at Sudan, Congo, we mentioned Afghanistan, and of course ILOT is all 40 years of presence, or more than 40 years of presence. That makes it sometimes very difficult. Why are we not denouncing? We have denounced several times. We have recently, our president was in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in Ramallah, and he was very clear that yes, there are very serious violation of international humanitarian law, that there are very specific consequences, humanitarian consequences to that. Now, is that enough to impact the situation on the ground? We don't think so. We think we need to be clear, direct, sometimes public, but first and foremost bilateral, because we need to make it clear towards the different stakeholders, the responsible. We can be public also, we've been public. Our president made an important speech at Hebrew University to really be clear on what we think about the legality of some of the behavior of the Israeli authorities, but also to link it with our own operation. I think we have absolute responsibility to try to find solutions and to bring humanitarian aid in the region, both in the occupied territory but also in Gaza. And that's very important. I hope the situation will improve, but it's true, it's remain a very big focus for the ICRC.
Okay, let's. We've got a lot of questions here, so let's move on. This is a general question. Ajebe from Germany is asking, do you think we need to adapt IHL, international humanitarian law, to contemporary challenges? What do you think about that, Yves?
The answer is yes, but let's put it that way. I think if you look at international humanitarian law, and in general international public law, it's a branch of law which are adapting themselves constantly, right? If you look at the Geneva Convention, for example, if you look at the protocol, right, they are adapting themselves. And I think that's important to look at that. And of course, as an organization who has a mandate to develop international humanitarian law, we are trying constantly to adapt or to clarify notions. Because I think we have to agree that the way war are sometimes fought needs to be understood, and we need to clarify. So typically we need to clarify what it means today to be a combatant or not. What is a civilian today in some conflict? How do we manage it? How are we helping, in fact, to be sure that we are talking about civilian and combatant? So what we call the direct participation to hostilities have been something we've looked very carefully. We have looked carefully about the notion of occupation also. But we're also developing sometimes new treaty for new weapons. We have looked carefully on landmine, we know that, but also all the different weapons we're looking. So constantly we need to adapt that, but on the other hand, agree that the Geneva Convention are a bedrock, very solid rock of the international humanitarian law, and we want to maintain that. And then that's very important. So yes, we need to adapt. We need to be aware also of the customary law, which is very important of international humanitarian law, and make sure that we really maintain responsibility to implement international humanitarian law, but also we are sure about the fact that impunity doesn't exist, and maybe that's the big issue, because international humanitarian law is interesting only if, of course, it is implemented by the party themselves. And that's where we are very carefully looking at.
And I think that really relates to the previous question we had from ILOT, about being vocal or denouncing when, for example, civilians are attacked and IHL is not respected. I mean, there has to be some follow-up. There have to be repercussions when IHL is not respected. I mean, how does that play into this whole idea of IHL is solid, it stays, it is at the core of what we do, but when it's denounced, when it's actually ignored, what is the next step?
Can I just say first, I think, and I'm really thinking about that, I'm of the opinion that the fact to have low regulate war are absolutely critical for humanity, not only for the ICRC, for humanity. I mean, this is really fundamental. And without this law, the situation will be just a disaster, because at least we have a reference, we have a common language between all of us around the world of what is allowed or what is not allowed. B, we know that just public denunciation, let's be very clear, won't make a difference. Public denunciation are sometimes very useful to put pressure, but it's only one part of it. I think we think more and more in the world of today that it's also very important to engage people face to face, including government, including non-state armed group. I mean, you need to engage them on the spot, have a discussion. You need to be close to where it's happening. And last but not least, I'm really of the opinion that if you want international humanitarian law to be respected, it needs to be two elements. One, it needs to be understood, thought, educate, through education, but it needs also sanction. So if there is no sanction, there will be no implementation. And the only way to have sanction is really make sure that in the military doctrine, in the regulation, in the commitment of all the people, they are convinced that's the way to go. And I think that's very important to look at. So it cannot just be the ICRC role. We have to be very careful. We have to responsibilize armies, governments, non-state armed groups around the world.
Well, we've got music and sound going on in the background. You can really hear the open day going on as we speak. But let's move on now. We've got a question here about the whole scope of the way ICRC is working now. Bariiul from United Arab Emirates, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly there, Bariiul, is asking, what's the biggest challenge in helping people now in war-torn countries as opposed to efforts, say, 10 years ago?
I really see two major challenges. One is really to get access to the people affected. I think access for humanitarian, for an organization like ICRC, which is willing to really go where it's happening, including in the most difficult places, access has become more difficult, no doubt on that one. You can see that humanitarian action is also maybe less welcome than it was 10 years ago. Maybe some people think that, humanitarian cover a different agenda. And that's worrying, and we see that for us, the negotiation part, the transaction part, I would say, with a lot of different people, from non-state armed group, government, but also people in the street, has become more complex right now to get access, really, to be there, to stay. That's one. I think the second thing which has changed over the last 10 years is that people themselves, people affected, have much more opinion, and they are much more forceful about what they would like from us than they were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, my sense was that people were sometimes maybe receiving our help, our aid, humanitarian aid, without really challenging us. Today, they are much more challenging. And to be honest, I found that challenging and difficult, but sometimes also very positive, because it allows us to adapt ourselves. It has really obliged over the last 10 years to professionalize our services. We cannot just bring standard things to the people like that, People are with specific needs.
So they're more demanding about what they want.
Yeah, and they have opinion. And they know what you can do or not. And what is certainly very new is mobile phone. Mobile phone over the last 10 years has changed totally the way people are connecting to each other. They are comparing. They're watching what we do in Somalia, what we do in Sudan, and then they're saying, yeah, but you do differently. I mean, it's a very interesting dynamic. So the relationship towards or with people affected has changed very much so over time. And what is interesting, it has also changed the type of service we are providing. Give you an example. 10 years ago, we didn't have at all any forensic service at the ICRC or any psychological support. We have discovered over the last 10 years, dealing with people being under pressure sometimes, that yes, there was an enormous demand to manage missing people, for example, that women in the family household were asking us, please help us to find, for example, our husband. You need to go one step further. We think it's not enough just to do some family message. Please, could you provide us with specific service? In forensic, we did it. We had to do it. Same when there was questions on sexual violence, for example, we had to understand the problems and not just say, oh, there's a big problem, but to propose new response. And that's challenging, but very positive.
Okay, linked to that really is Adam from the occupied territories is asking, how can the ICRC cope with the increasing number of protracted crises? I mean, that is links to how things have changed, but also how things have not changed in many places.
It's a very good question, and I would say if you would look over the last 20 years, what has changed? I would say if we celebrate the 150th anniversary, what has dramatically changed in our history is that I would say a few decades ago, ICRC would come in a war and leave, right? Almost like a fire brigade, right? Today, when do you come in Sudan, in South Sudan, in Israel occupied territory, or in Afghanistan, or in Colombia? I mean, the problem is, when does the war end? Maybe the situation can calm down a little bit, but we realize that we need to be able to stay, to understand, and to be much more connected with the coping mechanism of the people. Because one thing, when we're dealing with protracted conflict, you need to understand the dynamic, you need to understand what are the needs of the people, and sometimes the needs of the people are different type of layer of problems. Look at Mali, for example. We have a major crisis in Mali, but it's a crisis linked with violence, conflict, but also, on the other hand, nothing to do with it, which is then problems of food, of climate change, which has totally changed the dynamic within the country. So you need, when you respond, and maybe this is the most challenging, we need as an organization, try to understand the different dynamic of the need, and then try to be able to respond as much as possible to what is important for the people. And that's sometimes not easy at all.
And how do you get away from just creating dependence? I mean, this must be one of the problems in these very long, protracted conflicts. The longer you're there, the longer you create
you do that by adapting your response. You cannot standardize the response. I mean, you have to be very careful that you just don't provide food, for example. This time is over. On very specific situation, what you need to be able to do is to understand what are the needs and what are the coping mechanisms of the people you're trying to help. And then you need absolutely to make sure that you're providing support. Let me give you an example. In the region of the Sahel, what we've done over the last years is to really provide a maximum of veterinary, we say vet services, vet services to animals there, because in fact the animals are central for the people if they want to be able to cope with the system. It was not something we were doing 20 years ago, but we have to adapt. And that's the type of response we need to look into that. Knowing that, as you mentioned, the solution is with the people. That's very clear, and we need to be aware of that.
Natalie from Indonesia is asking, do you think the ICRC is doing enough to provide assistance for those in need? And what are the challenges of doing enough? Where do you start? Where do you stop? I know what your question is going to be, but
the answer is, can I say, it's a mixed answer. On one hand, you would all say no. If I look at the needs, and I must say over the last few years, the sense is that there is more pressure on the people overall, almost everywhere. We see more poor people, we see more violence, the situation is more difficult. And maybe we see sometimes less humanitarian people, because there's less money also, less services for people. So in a way you want to do more, and I think we are striving to do more. But then the limit is very clear. We have a limit which is linked with, of course, our resources and our human resources and our competences. So we don't throw money. We are very careful at people. We are trying to find a right balance between our own competences, having the right people out there, listening, trying to find the right solutions. So there are some limits, very clearly. So what we're trying to do when we have more needs is also to be a bit more open to partnership. And we've tried to work differently with organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, for example, or some Red Cross, National Red Cross or Red Crescent. And sometimes when we combine that together, the response is bigger, and the impact is bigger. So maybe that's certainly one of the options we will have to look in the years to come.
So perhaps being less of an isolated island, which maybe at
on,
times ICRC has been accused in the past,
but
really reaching out and working in partnership.
But I never had the feeling that we were an island as such, because you're not. I mean, you're constantly in connections with so many people. So I don't think I don't see us at all as an island. But maybe what you say is, can we, in our response, do a bit more partnership locally and internationally, connect ourselves maybe differently with also some strong local organization? The answer is yes, we could do more, absolutely yes.
Changing the subject a little bit now, we've had a number of questions relating to the ICRC's own staff and in fact humanitarian staff working for the very many other organisations throughout the world. A very important question here, and it's something that's on all our minds, from Terry in Nigeria, who's asking, how can we stop attacks on humanitarian workers? And before I get you to answer that one, a related question that's come in is the suggestion that somehow we should create some kind of an international body that will protect aid workers. What do you think of that? Is that a feasible idea?
I would have some doubt about that, right? Because I think it would be useful to look at why do we have attack in the against humanitarian worker. I would first start to say we should not focus only on humanitarian actors. I think we should also look at what is happening to journalists, what is happening to civilians. So there is a trend here, right? And it's not just about humanitarian actors. And very clearly, I think it's one of the reasons is because war and conflict are sometimes more about people and within populated area, which makes it also sometimes very, very complicated. But if I look at specifically humanitarian actors, the first element to say is the people who are paying the price are first and foremost local humanitarian actors. Our colleagues from local Red Cross, Red Crescent, our local colleagues, or from local organization. And we should never forget that, right? I think that's a critical element. Would an international body help us to deal with it? I'm not sure. I'm not always sure that new rules and new body will help. I think the question would be much more, are we able to create a culture of accountability, which will then really bring the responsible of this attack in front of justice, or pay for what they, for what they do. And this is maybe the big issue right now. And we need to find solutions and be careful about that. On the other hand, let's also be careful. I'm also expecting us, humanitarian, to also be careful and to behave well. I think there is also sometimes about also us, and so let's also carefully look at, are we talking about a targeting attack? Or are we also looking at humanitarian, which are not always perfect and not always doing a great job? So my expectation is also towards a very, very, I would say, committed but also smart humanitarian, which are taking into consideration the environment in which they operate.
Okay, well, again, staying on the subject of humanitarian workers and attacks on humanitarian workers, Adnan in Pakistan, and in fact a few other people have put this question very directly. When are you reopening your health clinic in Peshawar? I don't know if you can answer that or give us some idea perhaps in the wider scale of what ICRC is going to be doing in that region.
I could be very straightforward. It's a very good question. We don't know, in fact, when the date. We are willing, of course, to carry out a very, very meaningful health, I would say, operation in the region. If you look at Pakistan, but also Afghanistan, I mean, there is a massive need of reinforcing the health response there, I would say, not only ICRC, but in general. And Peshawar clinic is an important place for us, absolutely. Now, we have also agreed with the Pakistani authorities, especially the new Pakistani authorities. We have new government to discuss with them, to make sense of what do they need, what do we need to be able to reopen the clinics. And what I'm interested in is also to have a very, clearly well-functioning Peshawar clinic. So specific date, no, but we are on. We have the ambition, let's say, to really have a very meaningful response in the region, and we need to find solutions in Peshawar or somewhere else. But I would like to be able to improve and even reinforce our health response in the region. Yes.
So while we're talking about the health response, I mean, I think it brings up this, one of ICRC's big concerns at the moment is the Healthcare in Danger campaign.
Yes.
And we're talking perhaps about responsibilities of healthcare workers, obviously, but where is that going at the moment? And how are we seeing, more action being taken to protect health workers throughout the world, whether part of ICRC, part of any other NGO, or indeed part of, as you mentioned before, local health workers who of course are bearing the brunt of attacks in conflict?
Yeah. I think there is one good news and some concern. The good news is, I think that a few years ago, ICRC, we had the feeling that there was something going on in the world in a conflict which were related to health worker, but we were not sure, was it our own feeling or was it something more serious? And I think we have been over the last 2 or 3 years being able to really monitor, measure, give arguments, and we've seen a lot of different organizations, being humanitarian but also medical organizations, which join us and told us, yes, there is a big issue. Yes, if healthcare is not protected, then we have a major issues. We were talking about international law before, but for me, I'm absolutely of the opinion that if hospitals, for example, are not respected in wartime, and in general, then, and health workers are not protected, then it's really, really humanity which is at stake. I mean, we need to make sure. This is really the idea of Henri Dunant 150 years ago, which is a wounded soldier need to be protected, they need to be treated, whatever side they are. So I think coming back to these ideas and seeing that sometimes it's not respected was a real worry. I think our second worry, so the good news is, there is, I think, tractions over the idea. There is more people willing to reach out and willing to push an agenda. I'm even hoping that maybe the post-millennium development goal, to give you one example, the 2015, I would like to have one goal, for the entire community who says we need to protect more health workers. So it should not be something which is just owned by the ICRC. It is really something which is larger than the ICRC. So expect us to contribute, to push it, and our concern is still there. If I look at Syria, if I look at other places, but Syria is a good example, I still feel that the health care, the protection of health care is not where it should be at all. So expect us also to really be adamant, to come, to really try to mobilize as many people as possible in Syria and in the neighborhood. I think it's absolutely critical. It's a big issue, and I think the commitment is a very strong one. What I'm happy to say is that we're not the only one to push it. It will take time, I'm convinced, but I'm also convinced that people will remember that was also during these years that we started the operation, and I think it's great to know that. So I really feel that there is a traction, and we will be able to, I hope, achieve some result.
Well, just in case you've just joined us, this is a reminder. This is a live Q&A with the International Committee of the Red Cross's Director General, Yves Daccord. It's your chance to put your question live to the Director General. So if you have questions, you can send them in to us on our Facebook page, or on you can tweet us on @AskYves. We may not get to all your questions during this hour, but we will be responding to them on Facebook in the days ahead. Okay, so still talking about volunteers, staff, humanitarian workers generally. This is quite a surprising one actually, from Samr in Egypt. She's asking, why aren't you hiring volunteers from the countries where you work? This is particularly in relation to local capacities, Sudan, Pakistan. An interesting one because, yes, go ahead.
We do hire.
Indeed.
We do hire a lot of locally, I would say, grown people and people who know well the region. I mean, our local staff, we call it our resident staff, they are absolutely critical to our response. Now, what we don't do, and it is maybe the question, we don't then have volunteer working with us. Of course, we have professional staff, so we hire people from a place and we keep them. It's very important for our response to be able to really have a long-term commitment. Now, what we do, we then work with the local volunteers from the National Red Cross or Red Crescent, or from a national or local organization. Yes, we do a lot. But within our organization, we hire people locally, but then we really retain them as professional. That's what we do. And we've seen that over time that it's in a way useful for our ability to respond, for the commitment also, for the quality of the response. But then we also work very much with the volunteers from the National Red Cross and Red Crescent. So volunteers are critical for us as a very strong would say, based of workforce, but we don't then, when they join us, then they become professional. That's the way we deal with it.
So in fact, the answer is yes, we already do, but when the case of volunteers, we don't work necessarily with so many volunteers.
Exactly.
They work
within our organization.
within the but certainly within the national societies and the countries
Absolutely.
we work very closely with them. Yeah.
No, we know, and we know also typically, again, if I look at Syria, but I can speak about Libya or Mali, we know how much it's important to have volunteers coming from the different communities. That's critical. I mean, that's fundamental, not only to our response, but to the response of the Red Cross or Red Crescent, yes.
Moving on now to a different topic, we've had, of course, a number of questions about the funding of the International Committee of the Red Cross, particularly looking at the global financial crisis that many organizations are struggling with. I have a question here from Shingwa in the Cameroon, who's asking, how does the global financial crisis affect your funding, and how are you ensuring your resources?
This is the question, right? And I think a lot of us are struggling with finding the right support for, in fact, an increasing needs and being able to increase our response. Roughly speaking, the big effect, we've seen the effect on two elements. One, on people. First, before us, on people. We see more people getting less, I would say, support around the world. You know, a lot of government had to cut their social help, if they had one, a lot of economic crisis around the world. So you see more people truly not receiving the support they received before. So I think the gap is bigger. So of course that affects, in a way, the type of response, because there is more expectation towards us. That's one. The second element is there is a much larger volatility. Our donors are mainly government. They are party of the Geneva Conventions, so state party of the Geneva Convention, and they finance the ICRC. But we see that most of the government right now are under enormous economic pressure, so they are not able anymore to give us clear perspective for the next 2 or 3 years. They have a perspective from times 3 months, you know. So the type of discussion we have with them is sometimes more complex. But what I found interesting that this year, for example, we have been, despite of a very difficult economic situation, financial situation around the world, we've been able to manage, in a way, the increase of our spending to also increase our income. And that's something which I'm very pleased and very proud. It's complex, it's difficult, but it's great to see some country, new country also, joining us, supporting the response of the ICRC, and that's very important.
So how do you ensure that funding? How do you make sure that your donors keep giving, the countries that support ICRC remain convinced that it's the right organisation to be putting their money into? How do you really ensure that? Are there other steps that you take that are particular to ICRC? It's not just, you know, doing a good job in the field, but how do you really?
But it starts with doing a good job in the field. I am of the opinion that as an organisation, the challenge is very big on us, because we are a big organisation, but we are not part of the UN or a big global, I would say, conglomerate of big organization. So we are distinct from other organizations. So of course people are watching us, and they expect us to be good. So first, our access, our relevance in difficult places is still the first element that people will look. So are you doing a good job, yes or no? I think, and you have to know, donor country, they have a lot of people on the ground. So they don't even listen to me and say, oh, Yves, you told us you're doing a good job, thank you. They really are going and measure that in the field, in a lot of places.
So they go out there
and they go out and they really measure. So really the first element is really doing a good job. I think that's absolutely, I'm still convinced, and having the right access and the right response. The second element for us, very, very critical, is the ability to engage donors at different level, the political level, but also this, I would say, the civil servant level. I mean, they are important. They do a lot of jobs. So we need to be able to find a right balance between able to talk to them, giving them the right argument about why they should finance, because they have to convince themselves, their own people at home, right? Especially their parliament or other places. So they need to be convinced that we're doing a good job. So the way we measure our performance has evolved, yes, clearly. So we are also able to talk about performance. What are we doing good or not? And 3, we are also transparent. We are also very open when it doesn't work, when we have limits. And 4th element, we have been very careful when we do any appeal. You would look at Syria as a good example, or Congo. You would see ICRC, when we do an appeal like that, we look at the needs of the people, the humanitarian needs, but we also always look at our own ability to cope with it. So when we launch an appeal, we don't launch an appeal that says the needs are, you know, this and this and this billion and whatever. No, we're saying the needs are enormous, but the one we can cover are this one. And we are very honest about it. So when we launch an appeal, we are transparent and very realistic about our ability or not to cope with the situation. And that helps.
Mm-hmm. So how do you get over this kind of competition that perhaps people sometimes talk about in this humanitarian world? There must be a plethora of organisations working in a place like DRC or well, perhaps not in Syria. But how do you manage that? I mean, the difference between partnering and competing it's an interesting overlap, isn't it? How do you deal with that?
I think, can I just say, if you look at around the world, or if I look at the 82 countries where we are right now operating, you would not see that many competitions. Sadly, competition are only in key places which are very visible, right? Everybody wants to be or to speak about maybe Syria right now in the region, and maybe in one or two countries. We see very few people right now in some of the places, like even Mali, there is not that many people. If I look at that, Somalia, there is virtually not any international organization except ICRC, as an example. And we can talk on and on. You know, if you go in Central Asia, for example, very few people. So I would say competition is not everywhere. Competition is really in some key places which are very visible. That's one. So the first element for us is to make sure that we don't put our resources everywhere. And when we think impartiality, we also think about our ability to treat the needs in a way the same way around the world. I think this is a very important element. The second one, I think we have a different approach depending on the situation and depending on the humanitarian actors. We have a very privileged relationship with Red Cross and Red Crescent around the world for good reason, depending on the context also. So here the partnership is very strong in contexts like Afghanistan, for example. The Afghan Red Crescent is absolutely central to our response. Last but not least, we are always very careful about our ability to cooperate, and we are very careful also to cooperate with professional humanitarian actions like, you know, UN organization or big international NGOs. They are very, very powerful and very interesting. At the same time, we are also careful not to be part of something which blur the line. We are different. We are the ICRC. We are really specifically and radically neutral, impartial and independent. We are working in tough places. We talk to everybody. So we have to be careful not to be put into the same pot, kind of a big pot called humanitarian. So collaboration, yes. Coordination with, but never by. We want to absolutely maintain our independence of thinking and action.
Good. Oussama in Algeria has asked a question which perhaps you've covered a little bit in your first question on the money and on the funding. He's asking, where do your funds come from? Perhaps you could give a very brief response to that.
It's rather easy. I mean, the funding comes 90% from government. Then if you look at the 10%, you would say 3% come from private sources and the rest come from National Red Cross and Red Crescent and other sources. So the large majority comes from government. And if you look at the government, what you would have, you have European government, the European Commission also, you have United States of America, you have Australia, Japan, Kuwait, among the key donors of the ICRC. The key element for us is also not only to receive money, of course it's very important, and receive the right support, but it's also to receive what we call quality money. For us, it's critical that the money is not too much earmarked to one specific country, one specific project. Because situations sometimes change very quickly. We need to be able to engage the money, and of course, donors need to follow that closely, but we need to be able to engage the money where they are the needs, and very quickly. And sometimes the needs are not the one we foresee immediately. So important for us to have non-earmarked money as much as possible from our donors. That's a critical element, yes.
And how important is private funding for you at the moment?
Private funding is important, but in terms of amount of money,
the person putting their hand in their pocket to give to.
Yeah, it's also the corporate, organization. I mean, if you look at corporate organizations, they can do. Private people. I'm of the opinion that it's important because it creates a very strong relationship. Fundraising is not just money; it's also about relationship. We do have that with state. It's important that they have a stake to the ICRC, in the ICRC. Same with private people. The limits, and I think we have a big limit, and we want to maintain limit. One is private fundraising is also about investment, and we want to be careful not to have an investment too big. I mean, we have to invest 1 franc to get 4. We are careful about that, really we're careful. And a lot of National Red Cross and Red Crescent Society, they have a very strong private fundraising base. So when we want to go into that, we have to really cooperate and be very complementary to their strategy. So I would say over time, if I look at the next 10 years, we certainly want to increase a little bit of private fundraising, but it will remain under 10% of the revenue. So I think state will remain very, very central to our fundraising over the next years, absolutely.
We've got a few questions now, which are perhaps a bit more personal in nature. Jose Pablo is asking, I'm not sure where he's from, we don't have the location for Jose Pablo, but he's asking, what's your biggest goal or ambition as Director General?
As a person or as a Director General?
Yeah, well, take it as you will, as Director General. Yes. Up to you, that's an open question.
I would say my biggest goal as a Director General, I would say clearly, it's very simple, is clearly to be able to contribute to have an ICRC which is totally relevant today and tomorrow. Because I feel that the world in which we are all is changing very fast, at least some part of it. And it's not granted, your relevance is not granted anymore. So you really need to be careful, on one hand, maintaining very strong principle approach, but then to be able to understand what's happening, sometimes even look at, ahead of you, try to bring that within the organization. So the big goal is to make sure that we maintain, even reinforce our relevance. That's, if you would say, yeah, that's critical, because I think we have a special role to look into that. That's a big goal, absolutely big goal as a Director General. Now, as a person, again, I can see that, which is a bit different. I really would like to, as a big goal, I really would like, and be humble on that, I really would like to be able to contribute to a world which is able to cope a bit better with all this contradiction. I think we're going through a world which is changing. I mentioned that the dynamic is changing, both at the social level, the political level. If I look at the big issue, and I think I know very well as a Director General at the ICRC that most of the big issue cannot be treated alone, even not within the country. We need to find global solutions, both for refugee, for all the migration questions, the violence, the social questions, and I would like being able myself with people to contribute to a world, and maybe to see a world which is able to understand that and find some solutions. I found that very strongly also with my children. I have 3 daughters, and I really hope that they will be in a position to act and operate in a world that we left them not to damage. I think that's important. So that's my personal, I would say, goal.
Well, Nikki from New Zealand is asking perhaps the other side of that question. She's asking, what do you think is your greatest accomplishment as a person and with the ICRC? So what do you think in terms of your achievement? Again, coming at it from 2 directions.
As a person, I think is to be the person I am right now. There is a part of luck. I was very fortunate to be loved by my parents, to be well educated. I thought, I still think, but also to capitalize on that, to be prepared for what I'm doing right now, and to be able to manage a very intense and demanding job together with my family and my life. I think that certainly is what I consider right now the biggest accomplishment. It could change tomorrow, but it's a very livid and dynamic accomplishment. So
getting that work-life balance, correct.
Yeah. In order to be able to perform well, but positively also in all the different functions I have. In terms of jobs, there is plenty, but if there is one, is clearly around people in my organization. I think I have contributed so far to 2 things. One, collectively, not alone, I've certainly contributed to a better balance between gender in my organization, and that's critical. In my executive team, I have 50% male, 50% women. It looks a bit silly. You can say, oh, what is it? But I'm absolutely convinced that makes a hell of a difference for the ICRC response in the field, really, to have this right balance in a team of women and men. It helps to understand the problems, really, of a lot of people around the world. Makes a team much more careful, much more sensitive, gives different perspective on the same issue, and that's absolutely central. So that's certainly something I've contributed to together with my colleagues of the executive team. We've really put targeted, we really have pushed to bring that into life, and that's happening. My other, I would say, accomplishment still to be seen, and I'm happy to answer your questions in few years, but right now is to have also be more willing to push the human resources, our human capital at the center of the organization, especially bringing also the international dimensions from our expatriate international staff together with what we call our resident staff. So if we're able to bring the right balance, really bring human resources, human capital at the center of our organization, even more so, that would be something I would be very proud of, yes.
So that's to be seen.
The push is there, and the priority has been
the change
pushed.
is
there,
coming.
but you have always to look at, because you don't change that so easily. So it's not.
What
always
exactly?
easy.
What is the gender balance throughout the organisation? I mean, you're talking about the changes you've brought about here, but do you know what it is?
Oh, very clearly. Yeah.
Organisation?
If you look across the organisation, we have a rather good gender balance across the organisation. Typically, as all organizations, when you then move up in the rank, then suddenly this balance is a bit diverse. We have over the last 5 years put a lot of emphasis to have also a good balance, minimum 40% of men or women being at the level of top managers, and it has really paid off, and I'm very pleased with that. Not just for the sake of it, because as I mentioned to you, but also because it has clearly shown to be better for our response across the world, and that's something then very clearly accomplished, and I'm very pleased with that.
We've just got a few minutes left now for this live Q&A with Yves Daccord, Director General of the ICRC. But of course, you will be able to follow this on Facebook. And if your question hasn't come up today, it will be there on the Facebook page in the days ahead. Still on the personal level, Yves, there's a question here from Gorel in Sweden. And the question is, I think one that perhaps concerns a lot of us who work for this organization. I know I feel I've been moved by this, but let's see how you deal with it. You travel around the world, you see how people suffer from acts of war and disasters. How do you deal with seeing so much pain and not distance yourself, not become very, very detached from what's going on, and keep your empathy?
It's a very good question. It's sometimes a question I ask myself. I think I would be very nervous, and I would start to feel slightly worried if I would be cynical. And I think that's the worst that could happen as a humanitarian. For me, the two things will help me. One is my colleagues. When I'm traveling in the field, I'm really very closely connected with the teams, the ICRC teams around the world. And the way they work, the dynamics really gives me, frankly, a lot of hope. So I don't see always the problems or only the problems. I almost always see the solutions, even if the solution is very partial. But it helps me. And I think the second element is in most of the places where we are, even in the toughest place right now, let's say Somalia, for example, or Syria, or whatever. I have a feeling that even if it's very small, we are always trying to find solutions. And we can. It's sometimes very difficult, sometimes very frustrating. But I feel that we are trying and we are able sometimes to find solutions, to open doors, to propose something new. And that gives me a lot of strength. So I know that there is always people in the organization trying to find solutions. That's something which is very positive. What I found very difficult to deal with is a situation where there is no solution. That might be more difficult than just suffering. The suffering, there is always response sometimes. But when there is just no solutions over time, that's maybe the most difficult one to deal with.
We've just had a question that's come in from Jason in Ontario, I think prompted by the discussion on funding, Yves. He's just sent us a question through Facebook, and he's asking, how do you maintain neutrality when 90% of your funds come from governments? A good question.
It is a good question, yes. I think we maintain neutrality by, in fact, managing our response very carefully. If you would look at, so far, we are absolutely an organization who has demonstrated our ability to maintain our independence by the way, and neutrality by the way we are engaging all parties to the conflict. Afghanistan is a good example. We have not discovered the Taliban yesterday. We have worked with the Taliban, discussed with them with all the difficulties, as well with the Afghan government, the international troops, even at the moment where some government told us, no, don't speak to these people. No, we spoke to these people, we're speaking to these people, we're engaging them, because we base this engagement on the fact that's the only way to be able to make sure that a humanitarian response will reach the place they occupy, that we can also discuss the conduct of hostilities. So it's by demonstrating our neutrality, our impartiality, by engaging all the parties, that we are absolutely able to show to all the country who are supporting us that we are serious, we are careful also, but they know that if there are problems, they will see us and be also straightforward. We are straightforward with also all the parties. So each parties know that the way we will treat them is the same, whatever is happening. And that has given us a lot of ability to deal with these problems of the pressure of funding.
I think we're probably coming up to our very last question. Imran from Pakistan is asking this, and indeed many people have asked this question. Perhaps not such a tough one for you to answer here. It's how can we join the ICRC? How can we do something ourselves to help this organization?
You do a lot already, that's my sense, just joining us. If I just follow Twitter or Facebook, I think what I see, the type of questions, the type of dynamic you're creating is really helping us already to really find a way. But the best way for me, if there is one request I have, join us for the healthcare in danger campaign. Because I think it's a specific campaign. It's something specific. Respecting healthcare worker, respecting patient, respecting hospital is something which goes beyond our organization. And maybe you have yourself in Pakistan or in India or in the US or in Australia, you do have a response, maybe very, very small, but you will reach out, you will use your ability to manage social media, to connect with people, make sure that your young sister maybe or brother or your friends try to understand. I'm of the opinion that we have not seen the beginning of a real public opinion, the way public opinion will be connected in the years to come. It will be very different. And I think public opinion, with you connecting to each other in a very different way, managing a crisis, an issue, will make a hell of a difference. So help us. If you can, I can tell you it will already, at least for me, makes an enormous difference, yes.
Well, I'm afraid we're running out of time. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to all of you who've sent in questions, who've joined us today, and who've really committed yourselves, engaged with some of the dilemmas and the issues that the ICRC and the people who work for the organisation are trying to deal with on a daily basis. It's been great to have your interest and to have your questions. And if your question wasn't answered today, keep looking out for our Facebook page, and we will get to those questions in the few days ahead. It's been a fantastic day for us here in Geneva with our Open Doors Day. We will be putting together a little video with the highlights of the day on there, so do look out for that on Facebook too, to have a real taste of what went on here in Geneva over these last 24 hours. I think that's it for us for now. I think we're going to go back and join some of those Open Day activities. It's goodbye from me, Jan Powell, and I don't know, Yves, if you'd like to make one last comment to the people who've been contacting us today.
No, thanks. First of all, I really enjoy to spend this hour. It makes it a little bit difficult to know if you find it useful, because I'm used to have a lot of interactions with large audience, but directly live. So it's a bit of a premiere for me. I hope it was useful for you.
I think you'll see it on the Twitter feeds and on the Facebook. We'll get the comments coming back.
Please comment. I found that useful. Do we do it right? I think it's important. Thanks for your question. Thanks for your interest also, and keep staying in touch. I think that's something important. And thanks for your support. Really, that was great to have you with us in Geneva here.
Good.
Thank you.
Right.